Hello everyone, my name is Richard Smith. I'm here with Team Psycosmos to give you an introductory video to some ideas and future videos that I'm going to be working on and releasing in the coming months. Now to start off with, as I said, my name is Richard Smith. I'm a member of Team Psycosmos. We're a humanitarian organization that specializes on what we like to call spiritual life coaching. So what we really do is we take diverse ideas and concepts from a bunch of different spiritual traditions, also incorporating it with modern science, and we present it to people in a way that they can use it to make better versions of themselves, whatever that means for them. So for me specifically, my main three hats are is number one, I'm a historian. So that's my main background and my formal training is as a historian. So my main focus on that is interpreting the past, and the way that we usually do that most commonly is through examining sources, especially primary sources. So by examining primary sources, we can get to the root ideas of these spiritual traditions, the historical context that they emerged in, the way that those ideas developed over time, and how you can track that by examining sources. On top of that, I'm also what you would call an aspiring biblical scholar. So a lot of my focus recently has shifted onto interpreting biblical texts, biblical sources. I've started researching manuscripts. I've started very slowly but surely learning, ancient world languages that are vital for studying scripture, including biblical Hebrew, and also what is known as Koine Greek or Common Greek, which is the Greek that was used to write the New Testament texts. And then finally, my third hat is, as I said, we are spiritual life coaches. So we meet with clients. We've done so for years now, dozens of people. We sit down and talk with people specifically from a spiritual focus. So asking people what goals they want to set for themselves when it comes to spiritual health, but also we incorporate, as I said, modern science into it. So we're very much capable of at least listening to people from the perspective of biology, bodily health, and psychology. Now, I myself am not a trained psychologist, so I cannot provide um, a great deal of formal diagnosis or any sort of thing. I can't recommend treatments, let's say, or medical advice, that sort of thing. But we can give you some general tips and tools to connect you with people who maybe could provide you with those services and that level of expertise. But we still know a great deal about psychology, bodily health, the biology of the human body, that sort of thing. And we incorporate that into our spiritual life coaching. And so what we have here is a great example of an acronym that I came across recently that fully explains what we're talking about when we're examining historical sources. So here we have ACAPS, author, context, audience, purpose, and significance. And what's key about this is that a lot of the time in modern discussions, I find that because of the way that social media works and because of the way that information flows and is propagated nowadays, there's not a great deal of, let's say, source analysis or critically examining sources the way that we were probably taught to in high school. So in high school and even in elementary, so in high school and even in elementary school, you might remember that we were taught to examine, okay, who wrote this? Why did they write this? When was this written? All of these important contextual factors that you need to do to properly examine a source and whether or not it's reliable. And what I find is that for whatever reason, I don't think a lot of people are being critical with examining where they're getting their information from. And as a result of that, there's a lot of misconceptions out there in the world about a great deal of spiritual traditions, especially when it comes to Christianity, which I'm going to kind of get more into in this video. But what's really important here is that to fully understand, to properly understand where a tradition came from, we have to examine its written sources, the development of those sources over time, the sources from people who participated in the development of that tradition over time, and also any archaeological evidence that we can find. So here, for example, we have a great picture of this beautiful mosaic. It's called the Megiddo mosaic. And it's from what is now thought to be a very, very early Christian church that was discovered beneath a prison in modern day Israel. And it's significant because it has one of the earliest archaeological pieces of evidence that show Jesus being worshipped as God, specifically in this church on one of its inscriptions. Now, my main point of making this video really is that I see a great deal of people, and I myself have experienced this before, feeling very much like this figure here in this image when it comes to navigating not just spiritual traditions and spirituality in the modern world, but the modern world in general. There are a great deal many paths pulling everybody in different directions, and there's a great deal many teachers and would-be prophets or gurus out there who claim to be able to give you the secrets of enlightenment, the one path that you can choose from all of these different paths that will get you to your highest level of being. And what I want to do is sort of deconstruct this a little bit and hopefully present to you with what I would consider to be a good alternative to this if you're interested. Now, the reason that I'm talking about this is because this is a good representation of a great deal of the Now, the real reason that I'm doing this is because this is a good representation here on this slide of the multitude of ideas that we see in modern spirituality, in the modern spiritual community, especially online and on social media. And for lack of a better term, I think a good term for this is what we like to call New Age spirituality. Now, as you can see, just at a glance, there are a lot of different concepts and spiritual traditions here that people draw upon for New Age spirituality. And part of this New Age movement is actually geared towards examining all of these different spiritual traditions and all of these different concepts in a way where people can sort of mix and match them together. Now, I'm not here to make a judgment over whether or not that's good or bad. But what I'm trying to point out is that in the New Age movement, in New Age spirituality, what I do see is, for better or worse, people do sort of play this game, this sort of spirituality buffet, where they pick and match different things that they like from different spiritual traditions, and very often, more than not, ignore the pieces of that spiritual tradition that they don't like. So you might be wondering, well, why does that matter? Well, from my perspective, why it matters is because, as I said, it's very important for understanding a spiritual tradition, especially if you're living it. It's very important to understand why you believe what you believe about that spiritual tradition and where you got that information from. So, what do you actually believe? Why do you believe it? And where are the sources for that? And again, this isn't to castigate anybody or to judge them or to say that they must believe a certain thing. This isn't to say to somebody to give a prescription about you must believe such and such thing for you to belong to a particular spiritual tradition. That's not my goal here, and that's not what I'm trying to do. And I don't think that's helpful. But I am going to point out that there are a great many people who seem to have a very shallow, surface level understanding of these spiritual traditions and spiritual practices. And that when you live these things shallowly, sometimes it can lead you astray and it can lead to issues of anxiety, depression, what we like to call spiritual psychosis, all of these things because there's not a higher level or a deeper understanding of these traditions or these spiritual practices. So, for example, two of the most popular ones that I see nowadays is people being very drawn into the ideas of Gnosticism, particularly the cosmology of Gnosticism, and also Eastern spiritual traditions, in particular chakra meditation and what it's related to, which is Kundalini activation. These two things are usually not related, but I'm using them as models because they're very, very popular in the New Age spiritual community. Now, again, this isn't to say that Gnosticism is bad or that Gnostic ideas can't be incorporated into your spiritual tradition or your spiritual path in a meaningful way. And the same goes for chakra meditation and Kundalini activation. What I would like to point out is that these are two of the most popular forms of spirituality or spiritual traditions that is propagated in the New Age community these days. And that from my perspective, I think that it has given people a false sense of their divine potential. And then because of that, and because people struggle to embody that divine potential in their day-to-day lives, that leads to them having issues of cognitive dissonance, of depression, of feeling like they're not living up to their full potential in a semi-diluted way, all that sort of stuff. On the other hand, you have people who take it in the opposite direction, and we have people who come out here and proclaim to have defeated the demiurge, or have opened their third eye, or have achieved enlightenment, or have awakened the kundalini, or balanced their chakras, this sort of stuff. And what I'm pointing out isn't that it's the fault of Gnosticism or chakra meditation or kundalini awakening. The issue is that people haven't done the deep dive research into these primary sources as to what these sources actually say. And without that understanding, and with only a very, very shallow surface level, it can lead people to have delusions of grandeur or to equate individual experiences or sensations with a grander download or ascension or that sort of thing. On a final note, I would like to point out that I think the reason why these two traditions are so popular is because they give people a sense of divine potential, but from slightly different angles. So, in the Gnostic cosmology, the Gnostic reality, we exist in a sinful, somewhat evil material world that is created by a malevolent at worst, ignorant at best figure known as the demiurge. Now, he's responsible for creating the material world and the material humanity. However, the monad, the true God, and Sophia have ensured that we have a spark of divinity within us, and that is our spiritual side, our soul, and that is made of light and goodness in contrast to the material darkness of the physical world. So, on that hand, you have we have divine potential, but it's trapped within something wicked, and the goal is to shed that or to overcome that material wickedness by recognizing the demiurge for his ignorant status as not the true deity, and through doing that we can ascend back to the monad and be reunited with the light. That's the Western version. On the Eastern side, when it comes to chakra meditation and kundalini awakening, the idea is that you are, in fact, to some capacity, divinity itself, who has tricked itself or has fallen prey to illusions to think that you are only this mortal flesh and blood. You are only an individual human being, when in reality, you are just a facet of divinity itself. So in both of these systems, you have this idea of innate divinity within the person. And that I think in pursuing this innate divinity, this is what can, not always, but can lead people astray. Because you have issues of someone believing that they have this divinity within them, and then perhaps not living up to it, some days as much as others. And then this leads them to question and to feel some sort of deep sense of guilt or transgression against divinity or themselves or their own divine potential, because they've been led to believe that they are divinity, and yet at the same time they're still continuing to fall prey to temptations and vices and bad habits the way that we all do because we're human. On the other hand, this can lead to people who do achieve some level of success to equate feelings or experiences or individual moments of insight or intuition or even awakening, and they equate that with being at the finish line, at the end goal, of people feeling as though I have achieved enlightenment, I have achieved Kundalini awakening, I have ascended. And this can lead to delusions of grandeur, massively inflated egos, disdain or disconnection from the average person who hasn't gone through this awakening. And we see that a lot in online, in social media, in the spiritual community, in the New Age community, and through the people that myself and Dr. Matthew have worked with over the years. This is a very common thing, unfortunately. So to tie this back into Christianity, my goal is to present Christianity as it was traditionally, historically understood and practiced as a more grounded, for lack of a better term, simple alternative. And the idea is that not to give you what religion you must follow, not to tell you that this is the one true faith. That's not my goal here. My goal here is to present you Christianity as it was historically taught and understood as an alternative. If you are feeling lost, if anything I have said so far about issues in the spiritual community or in the New Age community or in your life, if any of this seems or sounds remotely familiar, I'm putting forward Christianity, as we're going to walk through it here in a second, as a potential alternative. And I'm doing that because, one, I've experienced a great deal of growth and peace through reconnecting with the Gospels, reconnecting with the story and teachings of Jesus. And also, on top of that, I think that there's a resurgence of interest in Christianity right now for a variety of cultural factors. But also, even more than that, Christianity has always been around and has always been drawn upon from people of various stripes. So there's a level of authority and credibility and recognized spiritual worth that's present in the life and teachings of Jesus Christ and in Christianity that's so powerful and so pervasive that even 2,000 years later, people are still using it to not only guide their lives, but to even justify alternative interpretations about Christianity and other spiritual traditions. So, you have people who, for instance, will claim that some of Jesus's teachings can align with, some Buddhist concepts. So perhaps, in his teenage years or lost years, Jesus could have potentially traveled to India. So it's to show that Jesus is such an important figure that even people who vibe or connect with Buddhist ideas will still give credit and authority to Jesus and even attempt to tie him into their own spiritual practices and traditions. So I'm just pointing out that Christianity has a lot of awesome stuff to it. It has a very long, rich history, and there are some problems in that history, don't get me wrong, but it has a long, rich history. It's incredibly pervasive and powerful, and that's evidenced by the fact that 2,000 years later, we're still talking about it and trying to understand him. And so I want to present that to people as an alternative to this sort of less grounded, little bit more free form, very potentially confusing spiritual community out there. So moving forward, I'm going to be focusing on presenting Christianity as it was historically, traditionally taught, how it was understood, how it was practiced by the earliest followers of Jesus, and how they saw themselves and the teachings and life of Jesus, what it meant to them, all that sort of very, very important historical contextual stuff. And then from there, we're going to move into talking about the major beliefs of Christianity, both on a surface level and on a deeper spiritual meaning level. So, what they believed and what the beliefs mean, where that meaning comes from. We're also going to examine Christian practices, so basic stuff like prayer, but also more advanced stuff like the sacraments or the mysteries, as they're called in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And the goal is, again, to present an honest, historically, traditionally grounded alternative to the New Age movement and New Age spirituality through Jesus Christ. Now, as part of that, we're going to also break down in some videos what exactly we mean by the New Age movement or New Age spirituality. So we're going to examine in a little more depth what I mean when I say buffet spirituality, so that sort of thing, about picking and choosing from different religions and different spiritual traditions. And in those videos, we're not trying to judge or castigate anybody, but we are going to point out and be honest about some ways that some people maybe go a little off the rails with this stuff or a little disingenuous or that kind of portray themselves as being more educated about the academic source material of these traditions than they actually are. And again, this is to present you with an alternative. So your path is your own. I don't know what you know. I don't know how well you know what you know. I can guarantee you there are many things about spirituality that you probably know that I don't know. And the same could go from me to you. That's just the way that knowledge works. So if you are vibing, if you are thriving, if you are advancing with your spiritual path in the way that you have found it, that is on you. I'm not going to take you off of that. But if any of you out there are confused or feeling lost or looking for something more grounded, something more solid, something more straightforward, I would like to humbly present to you following and looking into Jesus Christ as an alternative, both because it has been meaningful for me, but also, more importantly, it has been meaningful for hundreds of thousands of millions of people for over 2,000 years, to the point where he is still around today, still enduring, still being talked about and interpreted. And I think that that means something in and of itself. We're also going to examine what I like to call Christ mythology, or the Christ myth. This is something that's very commonly talked about online, again, in the New Age spiritual community. You may have even heard myself talk about this at certain points. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of self-correcting in that respect. But the idea is that one of the reasons that Jesus endures and is talked about so much is because he parallels, or as some people even say, copies aspects of earlier mythological figures. So here is a very popular graphic I was able to find, linking Jesus's life, teaching, style, birth, death to a number of other main mythological figures. Now, the problem is that when you actually examine these sources, the primary texts, and what these texts say, what the people who worship these other figures say about their practices, their gods, their figures, they do not actually match up with the way that Jesus lived, taught, was born, and died, contrary to graphics such as these. Now, this is the crucial point, which is that if we are going to be honest about any spiritual tradition, we have to go to the source and examine how it came to be and how it was conceptualized and lived by the people who first came up with this tradition. You have to start there. It doesn't mean that developments can't happen. It doesn't mean that, for instance, from the very beginning, Christmas was celebrated on December 25th. No, no. But it does mean that Christianity has its own unique cultural context for why that came to be, just as multiple other deities had their reasons and their context for their festivals and feast days. It's the same thing. So we have to examine them honestly within their contexts, rather than just looking at parallels at the expense of the differences. Because at the end of the day, the differences make the difference. And again, it's not about being mean. It's not about judging. It's not about being so focused on correcting people that we're basically just jerks and telling people how to live their lives. It's not about that. But it is about challenging where people get ideas and how effectively those ideas actually measure up to the sources. That has to be done, and we have to do that honestly and responsibly for any spiritual tradition to properly understand it. So we're going to be doing a big part of that and examining the Christ myth, as it's called, this idea that either Jesus was a reflection or an embodiment of all of these other parallels and major spiritual ideas throughout history, or in the worst case scenario, that Jesus was more or less invented as a sort of synthetic composite myth, neither of which actually checks out when you examine the historical sources. So we're going to be doing that, as you can see here from this updated graphic, which is a little wonky. I'm still working on it, so you're going to please forgive me on that one. But we'll see through going back and looking at the sources that these claims, things like the virgin birth, the 12 disciples, the way that Jesus died and was resurrected, what that meant within the spiritual tradition, all of these things are very, very different in terms of content and in terms of the way that it was conveyed within the story of Jesus Christ. We're going to examine what I like to call New Age Jesus. So it's very popular nowadays for people to more or less give some sort of lip service to Jesus, even if they themselves are not Christian. I've seen this from people of all walks of life, even atheists. So let's say, of course, I have things that I love about Jesus. But more often than not, these things that people reference is a very shallow, loosey-goosey understanding of Jesus Christ. And that if you want to properly understand Jesus Christ, to understand Christianity, you have to examine him in totality, so holistically. So it's not enough to find one particular quote from Jesus talking about love and saying that's all that Jesus taught about. It would be irresponsible and inaccurate, and it wouldn't give you a full picture. And that a lot of the time when people portray Jesus or his teachings in this way, it's because they're angling for a particular outcome. They have an agenda, more or less. And sometimes the agenda is not even bad and the people mean very well. But again, it's not about judging people. It's not about telling people they must live their life in such and such a way, but it's about saying if we are going to make it a point to understand Jesus Christ and try to follow him, or if we are interested in pursuing that path, we have to do so honestly and responsibly. And the way to do that is to look at holistically the sources that we have available for Jesus Christ. And on that note, that kind of goes for any spiritual teacher, be it be Jesus, Buddha, Zoroaster, anybody like that. You know, you have to examine them holistically in their context. We'll also look into what's known as apologetics. Now, apologetics is just really means defense. It doesn't mean, making an apology for something. It comes from the word apologia, which means defense. And it's actually referenced in scripture both by Paul and by Peter. So this is really, if you were to take away anything about the main goal or thesis statement of the videos going forward and of this video, it's to prepare a defense, and even more than that, I would say a positive presentation of Christianity, of Christ, what it teaches, what he did, and what it means, and to do so in a way that has, as Peter says, gentleness and respect. So I'm presenting to you an alternative and also a defense for Christianity as I see fit in my limited capacity to do so. Because as I said at the beginning, I am an aspiring biblical scholar. I am not, an expert. I do not have a doctorate in Bible studies. I have not gone on the ground to these archaeological sites and examined the manuscripts. But I have done enough reading over the years and understanding of spiritual traditions broadly, and I've honed that into my recent development to know enough that I hope I can present you with this alternative path and enough information for you to get an idea of how much Jesus Christ means to the world and how powerful he can be in your life. So I hope that I can get a chance to do that, and that's kind of the focus on all of this. Now, part of that is defending against what's called polemics, which is the opposite of apologetics. You have polemics, which is attacks. And Christianity itself has a very long, at times complicated history of defending itself and what it believes, of being persecuted. And yes, at times it has done some awful things. So we will honestly examine the history of the church, including its sins when it comes to major Christian figures and institutions over the years. And they also have participated in persecutions, condemnations, prejudice, all those sorts of things. So we are going to examine that and be fair and as objective as we can be. At the same time, we're going to acknowledge and examine how exactly and why Christianity has been one of the most persecuted and attacked religious faiths across history, and that's true to this day. If you go online even, it is one of the most commonly attacked, criticized, misunderstood spiritual traditions out there. And I think a big part of that is because of certain aspects of Christian belief and ethics, where for a lot of the case, And I think a big part of that is that, generally speaking, a lot of Christian ethics and teachings sort of revolve around letting yourself more or less be picked on and be attacked. And we don't actually have to do that for any spiritual tradition, for any faith. There is a way to educate people, to correct them, and to defend what you believe in a way that, as Peter says, is with gentleness and respect. So part of that is examining these different attacks against Christianity, where they come from, and why people have these ideas and these misconceptions about Christianity. And we're going to examine those. Now, that's going to include looking at different spiritual traditions that are related to Christianity that have had a complicated history with them, such as Gnosticism and other things that were declared heresies. And we're also going to examine modern attacks on Christianity in the forms of things like the Christ myth, or in the form of atheism or agnosticism. And again, this isn't meant to be an attack or a judgment, and we're not calling anybody a heretic or engaging in a new wave of persecution, but we're going to examine how and why these different traditions and these ideas conflict with Christianity, both historically and today. We're going to examine the main sources of Christianity, especially the four Gospels, which give us the best biographical information we have about the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We'll also look at texts outside of the Bible that give us additional context, such as writings of historians like Tacitus and Josephus. And at the same time, we'll look at other writings from within the early Christian community, such as the Apostolic Fathers. We'll take time to give you a clear picture of what we consider the historical Jesus and historical Christianity, and how that is complemented by and somewhat contrasts how he's presented when it comes to being the Son of God, the Son of Man in the Gospels. Forward, I am as much on this journey as you are. I am still learning, I am still growing, and I am journeying alongside of you, not telling you where you must go or trying to lead you in any particular way. I hope that if in some way this resonated with you, if you feel a calling from Christ, if you're looking for another way to practice spirituality, or even if you're just interested in an alternative perspective, I would love for you to stick around and join me on this journey so that we can walk closer to God together. So if there's anything you want to see, if there's anything you're going through, if there's anything I can do, please let me know. I appreciate any support you can give. Comment, like, share, subscribe. I am just really happy and proud to be on this journey with you. I hope that I can do right by you and give you some sort of service, and just thank you. So in summary, going forward, I'm going to be making a lot of videos. They're going to center around understanding traditional historic Christianity, expanding and exploring about what it believes and practices, how it developed over time, and we're also going to provide clarifying defenses against some misconceptions and even attacks against Christianity in the modern world. So, with all that being said, I think it is only appropriate to end on a note of prayer, the only prayer that Jesus Christ himself specifically gave us and told us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the power, the kingdom, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So on that note, thank you all again. I hope to see you again, and God and Christ bless you.